So, guess who's live? We are. I just dropped my pen. Then I picked it up, so it's all good. So here we go. It's a Monday. Small ball coming at you. We're back. Our first show of March. The picture looks a little bit grainy from my vantage point here, so I apologize for that. Maybe it's not to you guys. I'm going to notify the world before we get started. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Thank you for your support over the last couple of weeks. It's really been awesome. We got a cool show coming at you today. I'm going to notify the world. And I'm taking callers, like I said. So if you want to call in, we had our first callers last week in show history, which was a lot of fun. If you want to call in, the process is DM the Small Ball Instagram. I said I'll be taking callers at 10, but this first segment that I'm going to do might run a little bit past that. So as soon as we're done, and I'll let you know when to DM the Instagram. Maybe like I'm thinking 10:05 to probably later, probably like 10 to 10:15. I will be accepting callers. So please do call in if you want to, because it was a lot of fun last week. I wanted to address one other minor thing. I wore this hat maybe like a week and a half ago on the show. And I got a lot of comments like, why are you wearing an Astros hat? It's not an Astros hat. I'm not really sure why people thought it was an Astros hat. It's black and orange, and obviously it has the H, so I get that. But this is not an Astros hat. This is my own summer baseball team hat. So do not think that this is an Astros hat, because it's not. And I do not own an Astros hat. So moving on. Thank you guys again for tuning in. Just a reminder, in case you weren't here, callers, accepting callers after this first segment. And this first segment is, because it's a Monday, right? So you know what that means. We got a divisional prediction coming at you right now. So we did the American League East just a week ago. So now today, we are actually going to do the American League Central. And this one is interesting to me because it's clear, very clear to me, how this division is going to play out, with the exception of the bottom two. I think they're close, but I'll get down to that in a second. But I've heard a lot of I've heard a lot of opinions about the American League Central that I feel to be very wrong. And we will get there when we get there, and I will be sure to talk about that. But this is an interesting division to me because I think it's pretty clear how it's going to shake out, but I've heard a lot of opinions that are different from mine. So here we go. We're going to get right into it. Obviously, comment if you agree or disagree. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So again, AL Central coming at you. Here we go. Coming in last place, I actually have them doing a little bit better than I think a lot of people anticipate. The Tigers, I think, still to me are the worst team in this division. The lineup is really, really not where it needs to be at all. I actually think this pitching staff, especially if they get Michael Fulmer back for a good amount of the season, coming off of Tommy John surgery. Also, the addition of Austin Romine, who is limited talent-wise, but has a really, really good ability to manage a pitching staff and makes one a lot better. We saw, and I've talked about his ability to do that in New York. And the bullpen is not good either, but it's passable, better than the team that I have next on this list. So again, I think they're going to give up fewer runs than most people think, but they're not going to score. I don't think they're the worst team in baseball. I do think they're the worst team in this division, though, by a touch. I have them going 60 and 102. So again, this lineup is very, very weak, and no real reinforcements coming this year, with the exception of both from New York, Cameron Maybin and Austin Romine. So offensively, not really going to add much. Defensively, they will. I don't mind their defense. I think that I think they're going to give up fewer runs than most people think. I have them going 60 and 102. I think they'll win 60 games, but that's it. Tigers at 5. Number 4 is the Royals. So these are obviously the two worst teams in this division. I have the Royals actually doing a little bit worse than a lot of people think. I think their roster is very weak. I do think the addition of Mike Matheny will edge them out over the Tigers, just purely on managerial prowess. This rotation and this bullpen is really, really, really weak. The rotation is bad. The bullpen's even worse. Offensively, I don't hate them. And defensively, in particular, they have some pieces, but a lot of holes. They add Maikel Franco, who could potentially rejuvenate his career. Salvador Perez is coming back from that odd ACL injury. Not sure what he's going to be. To me, I think they added a couple pieces that are going to help them. I think Whit Merrifield is a legitimate star who's improving. But this pitching staff and bullpen is, as a unit together, going to probably give up the most runs in baseball. Salvador Perez might be able to limit that a little bit, but I'm not sure how much he's going to be catching, both between his old age and the knee injury that he suffered last year while boarding a team bus, which is just ludicrous. But I have the Royals going 62 and 100, barely edging out the Tigers, but these are definitely clearly the two worst teams in this division. I have them both losing 100 games. No real potential, obviously, this year for the Royals or the Tigers, but I got Tigers 5, Royals 4, and number 3, and this is where it starts to get a little bit interesting for me. So I have heard, there's 3 teams, right, that you can sort of reasonably make an argument can win this division. I've heard the Twins, the Indians, and the White Sox. When I hear the White Sox being named as the favorite to win the AL Central, I don't understand it at all. This to me is a hot take pick. I see this all the time, especially in baseball, where people see something they like in a team, in a player, or whatever the case may be, and they go out on a limb and try to go for a hot take and go for an under the radar team or pick or whatever the case may be, and kind of overlook a lot of the flaws that a team or a player may have. This White Sox team has an inordinate amount of flaws, and I'm going to list them for you. The biggest thing to me with the White Sox, when I look up and down their lineup, almost everybody that they throw out there offensively is a high swing and miss kind of a player. And not only are they high swing and miss kind of players, I'm going to list these players. They might have a dozen guys this year who are going to strike out just as many times, have as many strikeouts as games played, which is very, very bad. Jose Abreu, James McCann, who's no longer the starter, Eloy Jimenez, Yoan Moncada. So the guys that they're relying on to come in and change this franchise are these kind of guys that we're talking about, high swing and miss players, which obviously I've talked about in the past is not something that I look for in a player. To produce, but obviously there are things that can compensate for a high swing and miss rate. Obviously, if you can do other things to sort of combat the lack of contact, you can make it work. But Tim Anderson got better last year, but over the course of his career, very high swing and miss. Yonder Alonso, Lowry Garcia, Wellington Castillo, Luis Robert, another young player that they're relying on. They bring in Nomar Mazara and Edwin Encarnacion, who are high power, high strikeout kind of guys. So up and down this lineup, the whole lineup is swing and miss, swing and miss, swing and miss. And like I said, if you have a swing and miss kind of a player, you can compensate for that, right? You can do some things. Like obviously there are things that you can bring to, like Aaron Judge, for example, led the league in strikeouts in his should have been MVP season in 2017. But there were things that he did productively that obviously made him a great player. But if the entire lineup is swing and miss, strikeout, no run creation, no run production, no movement on the base paths, then that becomes a really big problem, right? If it's one guy, two guys, maybe three guys, depending on the breakdown of the lineup, that can compensate for these guys who are striking out a lot by getting on base, by creating runs, doing stuff like that, then you can have a balance. But there is no balance on this team. It's all guys like this that are strikeout, strikeout, strikeout. Here's the big catch also. We talk about a lot this debate, right, between power and contact. And a lot of analytics people now are saying you can sacrifice contact and you can strike out more if you add power. Well, this White Sox team last year was 25th in the league in strikeouts, meaning the 25th fewest, or the fifth most, I should say, sixth most, 9.62 per game. So bad strikeout totals, like I just mentioned. You know what they were also 25th in the league in? Home runs. So yeah, they're striking out a ridiculous amount. The teams, all five teams below them were rebuilding teams. So not only were they 25th in the league in contact rate, they were also 25th in the league in hitting the ball out of the yard. So they're not sacrificing contact for power. They're sacrificing contact and not getting anything for it. So this lineup to me is very stagnant. It's going to be very, very difficult to create runs. Jose Abreu somehow has been able to produce 125 last year, 125 and consistently triple-digit RBI totals in this lineup, which I think is way, way, way worse than people are making it sound. So he's probably the only piece in this lineup that can make it work. But like I said, these guys, Robert, Moncada, Jimenez, these are guys that they're relying on to become the next wave of players in this organization, and they're all the same. I talked about the Dodgers, right, and how stagnant and similar their lineup is. This lineup is even more similar to me. It's everybody on this team is a high strikeout, low contact guy, but they're not getting an advantage because of that, right? Like Aaron Judge, obviously his contact rate is not where I'd like it to be, but you can put up with it when he's hitting 52 homers in a season. But when these guys are 25th in the league in strikeouts and 25th in the league in home runs, that to me is not a balance that wins baseball games. Not only is their lineup obviously worse than I made it sound, this defense, people don't understand this. Analytics people are all about power over contact, blah, blah, blah. What they don't understand is that traditionally speaking, guys that hit for high power and low contact also profile as guys who don't play good defense. And these White Sox are no exception. All these guys that I mentioned, Jose Abreu, Eloy Jimenez, Yoan Moncada is decent at best. Nomar Mazara, these are not guys that are going to be contributing much defensively. So in terms of their position players, contact rate is extremely low, especially for a team that doesn't have power. I mean, think about having the 25th best contact and the 25th best power in the league and expecting to win a division. Like, that's just impossible. And to make it worse, this bullpen, their closer as of right now is Alex Colomé, who, no offense to Alex Colomé, but he is nowhere near a closer level pitcher. And he's the best guy in this bullpen. Excuse me. They have a lot of quirky guys. They brought in Steve Cishek. So it seems to me like they're going to piece together the pitching and rely on their hitting to really get them through ball games. But their hitting and defense is not where it needs to be. This rotation, they add Keuchel, which I like a lot, but he's coming off a year in which he didn't play, so who knows? New catcher too. Grandal, I think, is pretty good at managing a staff, but I've had my questions at times. But they're relying on Lucas Giolito, who was a breakout pitcher last year with minimal control. I'm not sure he profiles as somebody who is going to continue to improve. I think he might actually regress. I think he had a good season. But again, we talked about this where there's a difference between a guy who's young and produces early versus a guy who produces early and shows the potential to actually get better. So just think about the big picture, right? Hitting, not as good as I'd like it to be. Defense, nowhere close to where it should be. Starting rotation, relying on a third-year pitcher who has had one not atrocious season, and another guy who didn't play last year because he was holding out for a contract, and a bullpen that's led by Alex Colomé, who 3 years ago was probably the fifth or sixth reliever in a Tampa Bay bullpen that was average. So the White Sox, to me, I have them going 77 and 85. I think this is the safest if I were to bet, which I'm not, but if I were a betting man, I would take the under on their win total. I think it's like 80. I can't remember. I think it's like 84 and a half, something like that. This is the clearest one to me. I think the Diamondbacks over is pretty clear, but this White Sox team is not going to win 84 games, in my opinion. I have them going 77 and 85 and coming in third in this division. The people that say they're going to win this division either aren't looking at either. I mean, they can't. It seems hard to believe that somebody who knows their entire roster could actually think this team can win a division, especially in a division with the other two teams that I'm about to mention, who are clearly superior. I think they sign Grandal, they sign Dallas Keuchel, and Tim Anderson had a breakout year. It's kind of all of the factors that you need to have that hot take that I was talking about, right? It seems like they should be young players that are developing, sort of, or should be developing, but aren't. Plus the addition of two pretty high-level free agents. It's setting themselves up for hype, for sure, and that's where I think a lot of this is rooting in these people that think they're going to win this division. But when you look at this entire roster, they're nowhere close to the remaining two teams on this list. I have the White Sox third, obviously. I kind of went off on them for a bit there. I was going to save my White Sox spiel for the end of this segment, but I just squeezed it in there. So whatever, as they say. Number 2 is the Indians. And like I said in my playoff predictions, I actually have the Indians making the playoffs. Now, they lose Corey Kluber, who did not have a great year last year. So, realistically speaking, it's possible that they don't lose much. He was unproductive. He had like a 5.31 ERA or something like that. A couple breakout pitchers last year who I don't think are quite as high level as a lot of people think. I think they are really Shane Bieber and Mike Clevenger had breakout years. I think a lot of that has to do with Christian Vasquez, with Roberto Perez. But maybe it has something to do with Roberto Perez, who's still there. So whatever the case may be, their pitching staff is solid. To me, the big thing about the Indians is they don't have a lot of holes, right? They keep Lindor. There was some trade talks. They're defensively, there are some question marks, especially in the outfield, and Jose Ramirez has been hit and miss with his defense. But an infield of Lindor, they add Cesar Hernandez, who I think is one of the most underrated pickups of this offseason. Carlos Santana has somehow developed into a very productive defensive first baseman. And, of course, Roberto Perez, I think, is a top 3, at least, defensive catcher in the game. So defensively, I think they're very, very solid. I did my hot take of the day a couple weeks ago, which I haven't been doing. I'm going to do that a little bit more. But I had them as a team finishing top 5 in team ERA. I think a lot of that has to do with these young pitchers. And a lot of it also has to do with their defense. I think Emmanuel Clase is going to, I think, this year develop into a closer-level reliever. I think he's flying under the radar a little bit. Easy triple digits, live arm with very reasonable command, and 2++ pitches. I think that, again, very young, pitching staff and bullpen, who I think 2 breakout guys last year. I think there's some potential for an Adam Savale. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I've heard 10 different ways to pronounce his name. Adam Plutko, a lot of guys that actually might be able to have that Shane Bieber sort of a breakout season. Shane Bieber was in like MVP talks. I don't know if you remember before the All-Star break. He was actually the All-Star MVP. So I think that this is a team that's going to play good defense. I think they're going to pitch reasonably well. I think the lineup is strong. The biggest thing to me about the Indians, and obviously they missed the playoffs last year, which was a disappointment for them. And the reason why I think they're going to get back and improve this year is this whole Lindor contract talks, trading talks. I think that hampered their organization from an emotional perspective. I think that now that they're sort of putting that to the side and they're seemingly going to stick with Lindor, I think as soon as they fully make that commitment, which I think is going to be soon, I think it changes the culture of that franchise. I mean, this is a superstar player that they've been building around, and he's been leading this team into playoff runs. And I think as soon as you sort of like a Rockies situation where you start sort of questioning your superstar player, not even so much from his point of view, but even for the players around him, like Jose Ramirez had a down year. I just think that the culture of this franchise right now is in that middle ground of like retool or keep what we have, but it's not quite good enough to get to where we need to be. And that's the message really that's being sent to the players right now is like, we have okay players, but they're not good enough to get to where we want to be. So maybe we trade our best player. And I think that mindset and mentality has hampered them. I think as soon as they get rid of that and shift to a more winning mentality and culture, which I think they're about to do, I think that they're going to actually improve in the win column. And I have them going 88-74, which is a huge step up from what they were last year and what a lot of people think they're going to be, in terms of the odds and things of that nature. Indians, 2. Now, like I said, I really don't understand when people talk about the White Sox winning this division. And part of that is obviously all of the factors that I just mentioned, where I don't think they hit for enough contact. They definitely don't hit for enough power to compensate for that. Their defense is very, very questionable. Pitching is not as good as I think a lot of people think it's going to be. But another really big reason is the Minnesota Twins, to me now, honestly, I don't think they can beat the Yankees in a playoff series, but I wouldn't be completely surprised if they actually won more regular season games than the Yankees. I wouldn't. I think this team, first of all, they added a star player at their one position of need, Josh Donaldson. They have a top 3 manager in the game. Last year, with a pretty young roster, actually managed to make the playoffs. Got trounced by the Yankees, but I think obviously youth, lack of experience. I think now they're ready. Again, top 3 manager and Rocco Baldelli, manager of the year last year. So according to voters, top 1 manager. And I think this team is more than ready. I think they were ready last year. I mean, they're just they have so much balance, right? I mean, they have a lot of guys who can do it all, which is really what wins a lot of regular season games, right? You got a Max Kepler who can hit and defend. You got Buxton who can obviously defend, and if he can stay healthy, showed some promise offensively last year, hasn't been quite the player that they were hoping for. They bring in Josh Donaldson, who is, I think obviously addresses their need at third base. Had a bounce back year last year, offense and defense. He can do it all on both sides of the ball. Their one hole to me is defense at catcher in Mitch Garver. I think obviously last year his OPS was over 1,000, and I think that he is a top 3 offensive catcher in the game. But the defense really, really, really needs to pick up, especially if he wants to win a playoff series. Like I said, no team is perfect, right? Every team is going to have holes and weaknesses, but defense at catcher is a weakness that is really, really hard to overcome. So I think their defense elsewhere is very solid. Luis Ariz is a guy last year. It was funny. I was in Kansas City. I was at the College World Series in Omaha, but I flew into Kansas City. And before I went to the College World Series, I was like, I'll check out a Royals game just for the heck of it, right? And I went to a Royals Twins game, and Luis Ariz actually happened to be making his major league debut. And I'd never heard of him before. And he had a really, really solid game. He had two, like, actually eye-popping plays on the base pass, which is really difficult to do, obviously. And there was something about him where I was just like, this kid might be actually pretty solid. I haven't heard anything about him, but he seems like he's going to be a legitimate player. He ended up hitting like 314 last year in like half a season, which is absurd. And defensively, he's very, very solid as well. Not really quite the athlete that you'd like at the middle infield spot, but very, very sure-handed and has really good defensive instinct. So again, they have a lot of guys who can defend. Mitch Garver defensively is a hole, but they can hit, they can defend, they can pitch. The bullpen is a lot better than people are giving it credit for. I think Taylor Rogers is a legitimate closer, more than a legitimate closer. He had like a 1.78 last year, something absurd like that, and very, very clutch as well. Does even better against the better teams in the league, if you didn't notice. So to me, the Twins, I have them going 96 and 66. I think they're easily the second best team in the American League, easily. And I could actually, if the Yankees are banged up, I wouldn't be completely surprised if the Twins actually have the number one seed going into the playoffs. So those are my American League Central predictions. Just to recap, Tigers 560 and 102, Royals 462 and 100. White Sox, who I really don't like this year, 77 and 85, coming in third. Indians second, 88 and 74. And I have the Twins winning the American League Central at 96 and 66. So we have one division left. It'll be next week, the American League West, which I think, to me,